History tends to repeat itself. People said Melee was dying when Hungrybox was dominating every major for 3 years in a row. People said Brawl was dying due to Meta Knight's sheer dominance on the meta. People said Smash Wii U was dying because Bayonetta became an ever-increasing threat at the top level. And now people are saying Ultimate is dying because of characters such as Steve, Sonic, and Mr.G&W being consistent characters at the top cut of majors, or just flat out winning them and slowing down the pace of the game. This era of Smash Ultimate now being dubbed as the Four Horsemen era, with Aquila, Mia, Sonics, and Spargo practically dominating the top spots of every major they enter. But does that mean the game is dying, or are people being hyperbolic and doomer over the game? And that leads into the question, does Smash Ultimate's meta need to change? I took it upon myself to answer this question. First, we will take a look at the character stats and which characters that are dominating tournaments in 2023 compared to 2022. On top of that, because why not, for the last month I decided to watch and analyze every major top 8 set that happened in the 2023 ranking season. That's 1,640 matches and over 7,200 stocks documented, with stats around how every stock was taken, stock death percents, match times, stages picked, all of it recorded and studied so that we can determine today if there is a problem with Ultimate's meta and how we can potentially fix it. So first, let's start with the numbers, Mason. Let's talk about the meta of 2023. The image on screen showcases a character's placement percentage. A placement percentage signifies a percentage out of all counted tournament results for the LumiRank 2023 season. Of the 82 characters in the game's roster, 41 accounted for at least 1% of results, which has historically been a sign of meta relevancy, and stands as the exact same amount to hit that threshold in 2022. 2023 has developed quite interestingly when it comes to the tournament placements of these characters in this global meta. Steve finally overtook both Rob and Palutena, taking over the #1 spot, and by quite a large margin. Now, Steve hasn't hit the same level of dominance as Rob in 2021, or Wolf, Palutena, and Snake pre-pandemic, but stands as one of the few characters to ever break past that 4% barrier in Ultimate's offline tournament history. Fighter Pass 2 didn't quite have the impact as expected. Sure, characters such as Steve, Pyra and Mithra, and Sora saw increased usage and placements this year, but Kazuya, Min Min, and especially Sephiroth saw downswings in their relevancy. That being said, Kazuya and Min Min still find themselves sitting in the top 20, so they're still impacting the meta nonetheless. Smash Ultimate saw a lot of shakeup between 2022 and 2023 in terms of character relevancy. Characters such as Bayonetta, Corrin, Jigglypuff, Byleth, and Mr.G&W all rose up as meta threats in the past year, with players such as Lima, Tamapi Daifuku, Neo, Shattuck, Senra, Reno, and especially Mia all contributing a ton more to their character than last year. But on the other hand, Pokemon Trainer, Inkling, Chrom, and especially Lucina and Pikachu saw major fall-offs, with the last two both falling 20 spots and over 0.5% each. Even though they still have high percentages, characters such as Roy, Wolf, and Samus all had some of the biggest drop-offs in raw percentages, and popular characters such as Steve, Cloud, Mario, and Diddy Kong were in the top 4 in increases for their share of total percentage, with Steve and Mario picking up in North America, and Cloud and Diddy Kong picking up in Japan, with Diddy Kong being the #1 character in that region. So, characters that people are relatively mixed and negative perception on, such as Steve and Mr.G&W, are becoming more present in Smash Ultimate's majors across the board. But what about the third character people talk about, Sonic? While still standing in the top 20, Sonic has repeatedly been on the downswing since 2021. A very slow downswing, but the fall-off in general is noticeable. So, these three characters are still prominent threats, but not the problem in terms of overwhelming meta dominance that people think. And generally, people would agree. As many stated, top 128, top 64, and top 32 are some of the best matches to watch most of the time due to the character variance and competitive matches. But what about top 8? What about the most viewed portions of tournaments? The biggest complaints about Smash Ultimate that you will hear nowadays are mainly going to be geared towards the top 8s of majors, because, well, that is what most people watch, and it's for the most part centered around 3 characters, Steve, Sonic, and Mr.G&W. And in a vacuum, it makes sense, considering that in a roster of 80+ characters, these 3 have much more consistent appearances in the top cut. Out of the 40 majors that occurred in 2023 ranking period, only 3 did not have Steve, Sonic, or Mr.G&W present, with 2 of those being in Europe. This, of course, isn't thanks due to these 3 characters being part of the 3 of the 4 Horsemen of Ultimate. But it's not just them. Maestro also makes appearances with Mr.G&W, Ken is consistent top 8 threat, and we've seen appearances from other players such as Wrath and Taike. And even though Aquila is the biggest Steve contributor, 4 other Steve mates have made top 8, and that doesn't even include Mia's recent usage of Steve as well. These characters are seen at every top cut of a tournament, and not just for short stints too. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, I went through every major top 8 match that happened in 2023. While watching every match, I recorded the following stats that I believe were important to study as aspects towards the game's health. 1. The frequency of characters selected. 2. The frequency of stages selected. 3. How long each match took to complete. 4. The percent each time a stock was taken of a character that got knocked into the blast zone. And finally 5. The move that was used to knock out said character. Some important aspects to note before we dig into character case studies. The average game of Smash Ultimate in these top 8s took around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, which is pretty much exactly half the amount of time the match timer is set to. The average stock was lost around 137%, and the most common way to take a stock across the board was with, of course, back air. And, of course, the most common stage was Pokemon Stadium 2, with about a 31% pick rate across 1,640 games. Through this data, we can compare how these 3 characters affect multiple aspects of the game compared to the rest of the cast, and try to find the pinpoint on if these characters are the main culprits, or if there's a larger, more insidious problem happening that contributes more. Now, these 3 characters alone make up the top 3 most represented characters in matches played in major top 8s. In total, they made up a character selection in almost a whopping quarter of all top 8 matches last year. So let's start examining each of these characters in their own separate case study. First up, let's talk about Sonic. Sonic stands in an interesting spot. He kills opponents pretty close to the average percentage stocks are taken, and also survives around the average as well. Sonic's most popular killing moves, back air and forward air, also kill around the same percent, but despite being the fastest character in the game, you can't really say the same for his matches. Sonic had the second longest average of games in the top 8 of majors, and almost a minute more than the average of all top 8 matches. On top of that, Sonic was a part of 7 out of the 8 timeouts that occurred in top 8 last year, and made over 3/4 of the games that went down to the last minute. Now with that being said, Sonic can be a fast-paced, aggressive fighter, as there were multiple instances where matches with this character finished before even making it to 2 minutes. But overall, Sonic's game plan of outrunning your opponent is an effective one, and undeniably will usually cause tournament matches to slow down when this character is on the field. Okay, next up let's talk about Steve. Steve is, of course, the most represented character in tournament results, and has the second most matches in top 8. Steve's average match is about 10 seconds more than the average, and has 4 timeouts on the board in top 8 sets. Steve, though, has a very diverse amount of match times. Plenty go down to the last minute, and plenty not even hitting minute 2. Steve can utilize his materials to stop interaction and force the opponent to approach, leading to pacing being controlled by the terrain he creates, and how the opponent decides to approach. It of course should surprise no one that Steve has good kill power, as his average stock taken is 10% under the cast average. It's mainly finding kills with down air, back air, and up smash. Though not listed, I would like to give his neutral special a shout out for having his lowest percentage of average stocks taken due to its incredible edge guarding abilities. Steve on average also has incredible survivability, due to blocks either keeping the character from losing a stock later than they should, or because of their incredible recovery. Steve finds himself living 10% higher on average than the rest of the meta. All of these factors combined make for a very potent character who can change the pace of the game in very polarizing matchups. If their opponent can't overcome their block wall safely, then expect to either strap in for a long match when Steve takes the lead, or a very quick one where he steamrolls his opponent. I wanted to leave Mr. G&W for last, as he felt like a more peculiar case in what potential problems the character could be creating. Due to Mia's insane attendance and consistency, plus appearances from Meister, this character had the most top 8 matches in 2023. Now, Mr. G&W is a particularly light character, and his average death percentage aligns with that. Behind Jigglypuff, Fox, and Pikachu, Mr. G&W was the 4th most susceptible character to dying earlier than normal, being 11% below the average survivability. He also floats around the average in match time. He was a part of 2 timeout matches against Sonic, where for the most part has a widespread to how long his matches could last. So, what could this character be doing that makes it in the eyes of many to be problematic? And contrary to my own belief until I did this research, is because this character has a hard time securing stocks at the top level. Now, before you scream, "But his smash attacks" at me, let me explain. The Flatman is mainly taking stocks of 3 moves: back air, forward tilt, and forward air, with the latter 2 not an average killing until 150+%. So why is this an issue? You see, when Mr. Games and you watch, he can lock down opponents with very few moves in his advantage state, especially with up air and neutral air. Game & Watch will continuously build percentage with these moves, and due to its easier way of racking up this damage, it can get repetitive for an audience watching. Add to that being unable to secure stocks until high percentages, but dying early, games can start to feel like they revolve around the 2D man, as he will be spending more time hitting the opponent than the opponent hitting him. So, the 3 most divisive characters in the game all have very different potential problems that could be affecting how people generally view the meta, but the one most common aspect being that they are all incredibly common in competitive play. Out of the 173 plus hours of match footage I've watched to gather this information, 48 of these hours incorporated either Steve, Sonic, and Mr. G&W. So, with all the problems laid out, with matches taking too long, with inactivity being rewarded, with characters taking forever to kill, what could we potentially do to help these issues and to reinvigorate Smash Ultimate's competitive scene? While I'm no expert, I do have a few ideas. One territory of data collection I still haven't dove into yet was about the stages, and I want to go ahead and bring this info up now, as I think the current stage list could have some inherent clauses on why these problems exist. So first off, for those who are unfamiliar, out of the 115 stages in Smash Ultimate, only 11 have seen usage in competitive Smash this past year, but really only 7 stages were picked in competitive play. It should come to no surprise that Pokemon Stadium 2 was the most picked stage in major top 8s this past year, but it's not as big of a gap as you may think. PS2's smaller, younger cousin Small Battlefield is almost as popular, and surprisingly, Howl Bastion stands as the third most popular stage, especially due to it being a very popular pick by Japanese players. Now, out of the 7 main stages, there are some variants in size and blast zones, so that means there should be quite some variance in match times and stocks taken between each. Well, in terms of match times, the difference isn't too big. Smaller stages like Smashville and Small Battlefield do have smaller average times, but only by 10 seconds. And stages with larger areas of play like Battlefield and Town City are above the average by about 10 seconds. But surely stocks should be different. Huh. Well, that's odd. These stages are relatively diverse. I wonder why that is. Oh, it's actually because they're not! These stages all contain incredibly similar blast zones compared to one another. Smashville may be small, but when the blast zone is just as far, if not farther from the stage compared to other legal stages, matches still take longer than expected because characters aren't dying until high percents, and take time to recover back to the stage, and they will recover because recoveries in this game are generally really strong. And what's important to consider in our current rule set is that these stages were not designed in mind to have hazards off. Smashville and Town City were designed with the moving platforms in mind. Kalos Pokemon League was designed with hazards that can kill characters in mind. Pokemon Stadium 2 was designed with its transformations in mind. Every stage in this game was also designed with 8-player Smash in mind, where it is accessible to every stage, unlike its predecessor. The current rule set is majority medium to large stages with big blast zones, leading to longer stocks and incentivizing and encouraging circle camping. During major top 8s this year, only 8 complete timeouts occurred, with a majority happening on PS2. But in terms of matches that went down to the last 60 seconds on the clock, that list expands up to 37 matches, with only one of the main 7 stages staying out of that time frame, Smashville. One proposal you could potentially do to change the stage list is to introduce smaller stages with smaller blast zones. Smaller stages help force interaction, and smaller blast zones mean faster stocks, which leads to faster games. Let's take a look and compare some stages. Here's Small Battlefield as a baseline medium stage in terms of its size and blast zone, and Smashville as our small stage to overlap and compare their attributes. Here is a small stage not commonly used in competitive bracket, Yoshi's Story. The stage's general area of play may be a bit bigger vertically, but stocks can be taken earlier with its smaller blast zone than both Small Battlefield and Smashville combined, especially off of that top platform. You can take a step smaller and look at alternatives that have been used in competitive Smash before, such as Yoshi's Island Brawl. The stage is relatively same size as Smashville, but also has smaller horizontal and smaller vertical blast zones. You can go even further with some of the more odder stages. Castle Siege is an asymmetrical stage with an even smaller stage size in Smashville and smaller horizontal blast zones in Yoshi's Island. It's incredibly unique in its offering as a competitive stage. But if you want something small that is a little more proven, say hello to none other than WarioWare Inc. WarioWare serves both as the shortest stage in baseline length and by far the shortest blast zones in the entire game. The stage is a proven counterpick in the Project Plus competitive scene, and while the blast zone leads to incredibly early kills, it is still a valid pick to be a counterpick stage in terms of why stages are generally banned. The addition of smaller stages is one way to shake up the meta or at least help what might be some of the core problems. Another way of handling the stage list, if you're not a fan of expanding the pool, is potentially moving to a hazards on list. Most won't particularly agree with this statement, probably because it removes the most popular stage, but in doing so also removes the biggest stage. Smashville gains its platform's original purpose, where earlier stocks can be taken, and proven smaller stages such as Yoshi's Story and Yoshi's Island are available. If you really need a stadium-esque stage, Pokemon Stadium 1 is still a valid option, even though I doubt many would want to deal with the transitions in the year of 2024. But all in all, diversifying the stage list is one way to potentially help with some of the issues people seem to be having with the meta, but it's not the only option. At the very beginning of the video, I mentioned the fact that every Smash game has gone through a period of the game is dying, and we could take a look at each of these games and how they handled this era. Well, most of them. Let's start with an easy one right off the bat. Smash Wii U is still dead, though it was mainly killed off because of Ultimate's announcement and how close in similarity these games can be. Outside of SmashCon, this game doesn't have much of either an active offline scene or events, but many agree that Bayonetta should have been banned in retrospect, especially as when the character was being used by more and more of the top level, even with well-established players like MKLeo, Tweak, The Buzz, etc. all picking her up as secondaries. Melee is obviously still in a healthy competitive state today, with the upcoming Genesis once again breaking 1,000 entrants. So no, it didn't die when Hungrybox was the dominant #1 player for 3 years in a row. So, what changed? Well, besides a pandemic completely changing the talent pool, there were two notable things that occurred that I think also contributed to Jigglypuff not seeing the dominant success that she had. One was the introduction of Ledge Grab Limit towards the middle of 2019. You see, Ledge grants invincibility for a period of time once you grab it. And in simple terms, a character like Puff can utilize this and re-grabbing the ledge to both create a very tough approaching situation for their opponent and slow down the interaction of the game for easier timeouts. The rule states that if a timeout occurs and if a player exceeded 60 ledge grabs, the player that does loses the game. The rule mainly did affect Puff's ability to camp, but also other characters camping ledge as well, increasing interactivity during one of the most important interactions of the game, the ledge. The other aspect is that people just got better at the matchup. Skill level up aside, Zane has completely flipped over the Marth Jigglypuff matchup on its head, making it feel incredibly tough for Puff. I didn't mention the game earlier, but 64 has an infamous match known as Super Boomfan vs. Gerson that happened in Peru. It was the longest Smash set ever recorded, and if you're curious about its story, I highly recommend the GR Smash video that goes in depth into it. But TLDR, with 64 not having a timer, Hyrule Castle was an easy stage for Kirby to camp, and particularly the top platforms. So Boom decided to camp up there for incredibly long periods of time to win the set, and pretty much got Hyrule Castle banned from competitive play in 64 and a timer modded in. Brawl still actually has a small dedicated scene still competing today. While everyone knows Meta Knight was by far the best character in the game, the character is still not banned in the current scene, but the recommended rule set does revolve around him as well as the other incredible top tier character Ice Climbers. Ice Climbers are banned from going to Final Destination. If one player picks Meta Knight and the other player picks not Meta Knight, then the second player can pick any stage in the competitive stage list without restriction. They also have a ledge grab limit with 35 grabs instead of 60. Now, this rule set has been controversial, and I don't know much about its implementation either, so I cannot comment on the effectiveness on it, but the scene is starting to see a bit of a pickup in offline events, and this is an attempt nonetheless. Ultimate can attempt many things, different formats of play, though that is a bit tougher to do if there's no easy way to practice said format. Shortening the timer, if the match is going to go to 7 minutes but usually averages to 3.5 minutes, why have all the fluff? But then you take away people's long-term strategizing to approach characters. You can try to enforce rules that enable interaction, but unfortunately I personally would not know where to start. But even with these maybes and what ifs, I think there's a key word here. Attempt. I think at the end of the day, the Ultimate community is a tough one to start any sort of reform in due to its international scale, and no real central force, circuits, or publishers helping enforce or make decisions. But that shouldn't stop people from attempting change. Events ban Steve and people still show up. There's nothing stopping organizers attempting other things. I've seen top players and other notable figureheads say that it's too late to change, we'll get it right next game. But look at most active esports. Competitive seasons change rules all the time. For example, competitive Pokemon changes what Pokemon are legal in different divisions. Valorant changes which maps are in rotation in their competitive map pool. Melee has gone through many rule set changes, with ledge grab limit and the banning of wobbling being some of the most notable. Those changes were controversial at first, but they tried, and it became the status quo over time, because they were accepted as the better options for the health of the game. Hell, even early Ultimate, decisions were being made by us about DLC characters and their stages during the time of their introduction, whether we noticed it or not. We can try changing stage pools during each competitive season. We could try changing the timer, the format, anything we want. Because there is no one else dictating how the game is played, but someone needs to attempt to start. If you take anything from this video, it's that very little esports, hell even straight up sports, survive without change. We've been playing this game for 5 years. Even if 1.5 were technically taken away from us because of the pandemic, 2 now have been after the final patch of the game. And in terms of rule set changes, there has been very little since the release of Sora and the introduction of Hollow Bastion into the rule set. Ultimate could use a little shaking up, and I hope this video has influenced some to try. We'll never know what we like until we attempt to change. Thanks for watching.